Merlin direkam ini nih.
Of course, ya. Kita nanti YouTube streaming, Ibu. Kita YouTube streaming
Ya, oke, noted.
mm-mm,
Send me the link.
melalui Faculty of Law account.
Okay, that's good.
Baik, kita menunggu sejenak arahan dari Pak Dekan untuk memulai acara pada kesempatan pagi hari ini. Bagi yang belum hadir, silakan dikabari rekan-rekannya untuk bisa bergabung bersama kami karena kegiatan ini merupakan wajib bagi seluruh mahasiswa dari semester 1 sampai semester 7 ya. Untuk nanti bagi para peserta yang hadir akan kami berikan e-certificate yang bisa digunakan sebagai salah satu syarat untuk pengajuan judul skripsi. Seperti itu.
Silakan bisa dimulai, Mbak.
Baik, mohon izin untuk memulai. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this very special occasions. First of all, we would like to praise and thanks to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, the Almighty, the most gracious and the most merciful, for giving us blessing, health, and the opportunity today so that we can attend this virtual international public lecture today, Tuesday, 30th January 2026. I do hope everybody's in good health and safety today. My name is Marilyn Silviani and it's a precious chance for me to be your mistress of ceremony in this very special event. And I'm privileged to be hosting today's agenda. The Honorable Dr. Kusriskianto SHMH, the Dean of Faculty of Law Universitas Pancasakti Tegal. And also I would like to welcome the Honorable Speaker, the one and only speaker, Dr. Banu Prakasnuna from India, Secretary General of the World Society of Victimology, the Chair of the Membership and Advancement Committee of WSV, and International Ambassador of the British Society of Criminology for India. And also I would like to welcome the Honorable Moderator, Dr. Yoga Prihatin, MPD, the Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Education, and also the Honorable Dr. Susi Idayanti SHMH, Vice Dean for Academic Affairs, Faculty of Law UPS, the Honorable Dr. Fajardian Aryani SHMH, Vice Dean for Administrations, Finance, and Human Resource Affairs, Faculty of Law UPS. And also I would like to welcome the Honorable Dr. Haji Muhammad Hamim SHMH as the Vice Dean for Students Affairs of Faculty of Law Universitas Pancasakti Tegal, and distinguished guests, all participants of today's agenda. Warmest greetings and welcome to International Public Lecture 2026. This event is organized by Faculty of Law Universitas Pancasakti Tegal, Indonesia. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let us commence this event by reciting Basmalah Bismillahirrahmanirrahim, and let's sing together for Indonesian National Anthem Indonesia Raya and also National Anthem from India.
Recording in progress.
Sorry, Mbak Melin, we cannot hear anything.
Diri jadi pandu ibuku.
Indonesia kebangsaanku, bangsa dan tanah airku. Marilah kita bersama, Indonesia bersatu. Hiduplah tanahku, hiduplah negeriku, bangsaku, rakyatku semua. Bangunlah jiwanya, bangunlah badannya, untuk Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang tercinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, tanahku, negeriku yang tercinta. Indonesia Raya, merdeka, merdeka, hiduplah Indonesia Raya. Jaya He, Jaya 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 He, Jana Gana Mana Adhina.
Well, ladies and gentlemen,
Mbak Melin, excuse me. I cannot hear any of the national anthem of India. I think
okay,
that was a technical problem.
yeah, we are going to play again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let's sing together the national anthem from India.
Ya Mas Dahwa play.
Mas Dava, we cannot hear the song.
उच्चल जलधि तरंगा तव
शुभ नामे जागे तव शुभ आशीष मांगे गाहे तव जय गाथा जन गण मंगलदायक जय हे भारत भाग्य विधाता जय हे जय हे जय हे जय 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 हे
Well, thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure that now we would like to invite the Dean of Faculty of Law Universitas Pancasakti Tegal, Dr. Kusriskianto SHMH, to deliver his welcoming speech. For Dr. Kusriskianto SHMH, time is now yours.
Okay, thank you, Miss Marilyn. Okay, good morning and warm greetings to all distinguished speakers, our moderator, Dr. Yoga Prihatin and Dr. Banu Prakas. Namaste, respected college student and international guests. It's a truly great honor for me as the Dean of Faculty of Law at Universitas Pancasakti Tegal to welcome you all to our international public lecture. Today's topic, the ideal victim stereotype, how media and society self-perception of who deserve sympathy. It's highly relevant and thought-provoking, especially in today's global legal and social context. On behalf of the Faculty of Law, I would like to express our sincere appreciation to Dr. Banu Prakas, Secretary General of the World Society of Victimology, for sharing his valuable insight and global perspective with us. We are also proud to host this event as a part of our continuous commitment to international academic engagement. The Faculty of Law of Universitas Pancasakti Tegal actively build a partnership and collaboration with higher education institutions abroad. We work closely with partner universities and institutions in Malaysia, Morocco, Philippines, South Korea, India, and many other countries. And both for the student mobility program and international conference. This collaboration reflects our belief that legal education must be global, inclusive, and connected across borders. We believe that even like today's public lecture are important platform for knowledge exchange, creative discussion, and strengthening global academic networks. They also inspire our students to think beyond national boundaries and prepare themselves as future legal professionals with a global mindset. Finally, I would like to thank everyone who has contributed to the success of this event. I hope this lecture will be insightful, inspiring, and open new opportunities for future collaboration. Thank you, and I wish you all productive and meaningful discussion. Thank you very much, and good morning. Terima kasih. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Dr. Kusriskianto SHMH, the Dean of Faculty of Law Universitas Pancasakti Tegal, for the warmest speech and warmest welcoming speech. Well, ladies and gentlemen, and now it's time to move on to the main agenda, which is International Public Lecture 2026, and the topic of the discussions is about the ideal victim stereotype, how media and society shape perfect perceptions of who deserves sympathy. And we are so honored to be in the presence of the one and only speaker from India, the Honorable Dr. Banu Prakas Nuna, who will give the talk on today's agenda. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the talk and the discussion sessions for today's agenda will be guided by the Honorable Dr. Yoga Prihatin MPD as moderator. She is the Dean of Faculty of Teacher Training and Educations. And now it's time for me to hand over the main agenda to our moderator. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please join me in giving the warmest welcome to our beautiful and amazing moderator, Dr. Yoga Prihatin MPD. Time is now yours.
Thank you, Mak Merlin. It is exaggerated, actually. Well, anyway, thank you so much for the compliments. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honor for me to be a moderator for our beloved professor from India, RV University, Professor Banu Prakasnuna. Actually, he was here, I think, about 2 years ago. Am I right? Yes. Okay. And before we start the discussions, I would like to share, or I would like to introduce him of his short bio. Mak Melin, would you please help me? Thank you. He is a professor, or Dr. Banu Prakasnuna short bio. Dr. Banu Prakasnuna is an assistant professor, psychology and victimology, program director of the undergraduate criminology, cyber law, and forensic science program at the School of Law, and the director of the Center for Victimological Research and Victim Assistance at RV University. He's also the Secretary General of the World Society of Victimology, WSV, the chair of the memberships and advancement committee of the WSV, or World Society of Victimology, and international ambassador or the British Society of Criminology for India. He is currently a visiting fellow at the Montreal Center for International Studies, University of Montreal, Canada. Now he is in Canada. And this is I think in Canada is evening right now, Professor Banu. Indonesia, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you. And he is also a psychologist by training and has over 15 years of experience in counseling trauma victims, caregivers, teenagers, and the geriatric populations. Dr. Nuna is the founder and managing director of the Think Justice Foundations. He's also the founding co-director of the Bangladesh postgraduate course on victimology. He was also a resource faculty member at the prestigious postgraduate courses on victimology at the Inter-University Center Dubrovnik, Croatia, City University, Hong Kong, University of Surabaya, and the University of Indonesia, and Ope Jindal Global University, India. He is also the founder of the International Conference on Global Criminology and Victimology. In 2018, Dr. Nuna received the World Society of Victimology scholarships, and in 2025, he received the Impact Scholarship of the Leaders of Africa Institute for Grant Writing and Funding Program. His research interests are victim supports, sexual victimizations, secondary victimizations, trauma-informed practices, and victim support training. Thank you so much. That is a short bio of Professor Dr. Banu Prakasnuna. But do you think it is necessary for me to translate in Bahasa Indonesia, Miss Marlin?
Yes, sure.
Okay, let me translate in Bahasa. Dr. Banu Prakasnuna adalah seorang asisten profesor psikologi dan viktimologi, direktur program sarjana program kriminologi, Hukum Cyber dan Ilmu Forensik di Sekolah Hukum, serta Direktur Pusat Penelitian Viktimologi dan Bantuan Korban di Arfi University. Beliau juga menjabat sebagai Sekretaris Jenderal World Society of Victimology, Ketua Komite Keanggotaan dan Pengembangan World Society of Victimology, dan Duta Internasional British Society of Criminology untuk India. Saat ini beliau merupakan fellow tamu atau visiting professor ya, tamu di Montreal Center for International Studies, University of Montreal, Kanada. Berlatar belakang psikolog, beliau memiliki pengalaman lebih dari 15 tahun dalam konseling korban trauma, pengasuhan remaja dan populasi lansia. Dr. Nuna adalah pendiri dan direktur utama Think Justice Foundations. Beliau juga merupakan pendiri dan co-director kursus pasca sarjana viktimologi di Bangladesh. Selain itu, beliau pernah menjadi anggota Fakultas Sumber Daya di kursus-kursus pasca sarjana viktimologi bergengsi di Inter University Center Dubrovnik, Kroasia, di City University Hong Kong, juga di Universitas Surabaya dan Universitas Indonesia di Indonesia tentunya. Kemudian di OP Jindal Global University India, beliau juga pendiri konferensi internasional tentang kriminologi global dan viktimologi. Pada tahun 2018, Dr. Nuna menerima beasiswa World Society of Victimology, dan pada tahun 2025 beliau menerima beasiswa dampak dari Leaders of Africa Institute for Grant Writing and Funding Program. Minat penelitian beliau meliputi dukungan korban, viktimisasi seksual, viktimisasi sekunder, praktik berbasis trauma, dan pelatihan dukungan korban. Nah, I think that's a very amazing or wonderful biography of Professor Dr. Banu Prakasuna. It is nice meeting you here. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, finally, it is a great honor for the moderator to invite our beloved guest speaker or our honorable speakers today, Professor Dr. Banu Prakasuna, to talk about his presentations. And please do.
Hey, am I audible? Am I visible?
Yes, very clear, and we can see you well too.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Yoga. Thank you, the Master of Ceremony. Firstly, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the Rector of Universitas Pancasakti Tegal, Dr. Taufikullah, and the Dean of the Faculty of Law, Dr. Rizkianto, and the Vice Deans and Professor Yoga for inviting me to be here with you all today. UPS Tegal is not new to me. I've been there a couple of times, and I've interacted with several faculty members, and I was very warmly welcomed every time that I was there, and we did some joint programs, one in Bali, and there are some other events that I was part of as an initiative of outreach initiative of the UPS Tegal. So I have a very fond association with the faculty members there, especially Yoga was the one. Dr. Yoga was the one who invited me for the first time to UPS Tegal, and I'm very much grateful for her for initiating this collaboration and having this continuing relation with UPS Tegal. And I'm very, very honored and happy to deliver this very important lecture today. This is something which is very, very close to my heart. Most importantly, I liked my bio better when it was read in Bhasha. So if you had listened to that bio, it says one of my research interests is secondary victimization. And this particular topic connects closely with secondary victimization of any victims for that matter, but here we are talking about crime victims. Now, I'll draw some parallels how this particular topic is connected to secondary victimization later when we move into this lecture. But to emphasize on the topic today, so the ideal victim stereotype. Right now, what is an ideal victim, and what is this concept to start with, and why is it called a stereotype? Stereotype, in our commonsensical understanding, is very, very negative. And so when we are saying there is a concept which says talks about an ideal victim, which means it has certain characteristics. You have to prove certain elements for you to become a victim. So you have to have an ideal status of behavior, an optimal behavior shown during the victimization. So your character needs to be flawless. You have to be at a place where it was blameless. So there are so many criteria that you'll have to meet to prove your victim status before you could get the identity of victim. And so that concept in victimology, we call it ideal victim status. We will dwell more into what this particular concept is all about. And we are also going to look particularly very, very closely about how media and society plays in terms of managing our perceptions of who an ideal victim is, right? And also thereby deciding who deserves the sympathy. Okay, so victim by definition and nature can elicit certain kind of sympathy in general public, but there are moments where rightful victims are also denied of a reaction of sympathy from the general public, and ideal victim status has to do quite a lot about that. So these are some of the integrities that we are going to discuss going forward. Slide change, please. Yep. So this is one question that I would like to ask the audience before we begin. Do we believe what we see, or do we see what we believe? May I request Professor Yoga to please translate this to the audience, because I want them to spend some time on this question. Do we believe what we see, or do we see what we believe?
Okay, excuse me, I would like to translate. Apakah kita melihat, apakah kita percaya apa yang kita lihat, ataukah, this is very difficult, kita melihat apa yang kita percaya? Okay, that's the translations in Indonesia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Yoga. So this is a question that I would like you all to think about. Do we believe what we see, right? So if you see something, do you straight away believe that because you trust what you saw? Or do we see what we believe, which is dangerous, which means we have certain preconceived notions, ideas, stereotypes, the way we think, believe, understand, right? There is something which you already have, which directs in terms of what you see and process. So it will determine. So it's not what is actually happening in the reality, but what you construed as reality in you by the very definition of the conceptual understanding of what is going on in reality, right? So we have certain predetermined notions, ideas, sets of beliefs. All of that will guide our thinking and decision-making process, right? And we call this as social construction of reality, which I'll talk a little bit about in the next slide. Next slide, please. So social construction of victim, which means who is a victim is a social constructed reality, which means society has certain norms, society identified certain predetermined criteria to qualify someone as a victim and to not give that qualification to somebody as a victim. So society is clear on that lines. And this is a social construction of reality. So in commonsensical terms, we all know who a victim is, right? The one who has endured harm and suffering is naturally the one who gets the status of a victim. But the underlying mechanism is not so simple. Like I said, it is influenced by our belief system, stereotypes, lived experiences, fragments of reality that we are all exposed to, our individual experiences of becoming a victim, our victimization experiences, the severity of it, the intensity of it. A lot of all those factors can also determine in terms of how we see other people as victims or not victims. So if society believes, this is my favorite concept, if society believes a certain victimization act has a victimizing properties, then such an act is not victimizing, even if victims feels otherwise, right? So if society do not see a particular phenomena as a social problem, if society does not recognize a particular individual as a victim, or does not see that act of victimization carrying victimizing elements, which means society will also not see that individual as a victim naturally. So it is important for the society to recognize, to label a particular phenomena as something which is unapproving, as something which is victimizing, for it to be qualified, that individual to be qualified to receive a status of victim. So social construction of reality plays a very, very crucial role in terms of who gets to be a victim. Next slide. So we know that people's beliefs are rudimentary, are not, we don't have refined thinking patterns all the times guiding our decision, right? Our thought processes, our belief systems are naturally and primarily, they're very, very rudimentary. But they're all construed in a way that our belief system and our worldview are restored. There is certain purpose in terms of how these preconceived notions are there in our minds. Why are we accepting these particular beliefs as the guiding forces in our decision making process? There is a particular purpose of why they exist in the first place. And these media narratives, unfortunately, are also a reflection of several factors like gender roles, societal norms, stereotypes, etc. So, like how we think, the media is also projecting our societal beliefs, societal values. So, it is just a mirror of the society. Media is no exception. It is also biased. It is also carrying certain norms which are stereotypical in its existence, right? The next slide. So if you look at some of the early theoretical contributions in terms of understanding victimology, understanding victim status, right? Understanding victim precipitating factors. Victim precipitation is trying to identify what factors of the victim has contributed in terms of the commission of the crime. So when you're trying to understand the reasons for crime, reasons for victimization, if you're looking from the perspective of the victim and trying to understand whether the victim has contributed to the occurrence of the crime, then you're talking about victim precipitation. So there is a lot of initial research in victimology which has focused on victim precipitating factors, right? That is how the agency of the victim was first understood from the crime perspective, not from the victimizing perspective. So early victimologists like Hans von Henrich and Benjamin Mendelssohn, they're all exploring the idea that certain victims might contribute to their own victimization, which we call as victim precipitation. So they also understood, like especially Lozek, he commented that victims deserve sympathy only when they are evaluated as moral. So, which means the victims need to be good people for a society, us as a society, to understand and agree that this person is a victim of certain act, certain crime. If that A individual who is likely to be identified as a victim is immoral, he is not a good person, then you have a problem as a society to see that person as a victim. So, which means by definition of this, victim needs to be a moral individual to begin with for the society to easily identify as a victim if he has been victimized. So imagine a person who is not considered a good individual by the society, an immoral individual. And if that person goes through a victimization, now the society has a problem in terms of easily giving away this victim status to that individual because that person is immoral to start with, right? See, there are now the layers of different layers which are complicating this victim status. Then Niels Christie, a famous criminologist, sociologist, and Norwegian sociologist, he has proposed the concept of ideal victim. He has defined 6 different attributes of who an ideal victim is. And based on this criteria and categorization, an ideal victim status is established for a victim. So an ideal victim is one who at the time of victimization engaged in a respectable project, right? Like for example, if there is a rape committed, now, this girl must have been in that place, which is to begin with a safe place, right? It should not be like this girl is in the middle of the night walking on an empty road, right? That is definitely an unsafe thing. And why is this girl walking on that road at that middle of the night? All of this will cast some doubts on our minds, which will link to the character of this girl who has been victimized. And you have now a difficulty in terms of seeing that victim as a victim, right? So I'm not subscribing or endorsing this idea, this example, right? I'm saying how this plays out in our mind in terms of giving or not giving a victim status to the individual who even rightly deserves to have a victim status. So Christie's ideal victim is the one who at the time of victimization is engaged in a respectable project. So which means you cannot cast any blame on this individual. You cannot say that this person is at fault. He has done nothing wrong. So that should be a blameless identity of an individual for them to be qualified as a victim. Only then that individual deserves to have a sympathy of the society and can be rightly called as a victim. The next slide, please. This is another interesting question that, in the context of, in the perspectives of secondary victimization, this is a very, very important question that we need to pose ourselves. Why is it that decent people, good people, why is it that decent people, instead of relieving victim suffering, react insensitively and even contribute to increase their suffering? So this is what secondary victimization is. Primary victimization is that initial crime and the victimization that the individual has endured. Secondary victimization is basically this negative attitude, reactions of the society which are unhelpful towards the victim following victimization. So, a secondary victimization plays a very, very negative role on victims' minds in terms of seeking justice, self seeking behaviors. There is a lot of negative detrimental factors attached to secondary victimization. And most of the secondary victimization is committed by very, very common people, right, in the close circles of the victims, like the family members, the individuals, relatives, neighbors. These are the people who commit secondary victimization. Of course, the professionals who are in the helping profession also does engage in secondary victimizing act. But largely, the society is also to be blamed for secondary victimization instance. But the important question is, why is it normal people like you and me who are decent in our behaviors, sometimes when we have to talk about victims, understand the victimization, we fail to do that properly. Instead, cast some doubt and negatively label, blame the victim, right? And causing more trauma and more harm to the victim. Why do we do it? Right? So this is an interesting phenomenon. And there is a theory which can explain why people engage in secondary victimization so easily. And this particular theory is called belief in a just world theory. And this is given by Lerner and Miller in 1978. According to this theory, the next slide, please. So, belief in a just world theory. So, according to this theory, good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, right? So if there is some victimization which is committed, which is a bad thing, according to this understanding, this commonsensical understanding that good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people, if a bad thing happened to an individual, that person must be bad. He has done something wrong in his life because of which now he is suffering. So, so if because if I'm not a victim, which means I've been good, I have behaved nicely, and so I've not been victimized. This ex individual, if this person has been raped, right, it is because of her fault. She has done something wrong because of which this rape has been committed against her. Right. So good things happen to good people and bad things happen to bad people. So this particular idea is known as belief in just world. How is this belief in a just world? Is because we want to feel that this world is a safer place. Nothing bad happens to you. These are your family members. This is your mother. This is your father. This is your brother and sister. This is a safe place for you to live. You can trust them. There is nothing wrong that is going to happen to you as long as you behave good. Okay. So my worldview is restored. My worldview is a safe place. I can live safely without having to worrying about me being harmed by anything in this society because I behave good. The moment you see that other person has been victimized, now your belief in this just world has shaken. Now you cannot no longer hold the view that this world is a safer place because you saw that your neighbor has been victimized, right? Now your mind is trying to explain and find a rationale of how it can still be a safer place for you. So it is trying to restore your worldview that this world is still a good place for you to live. Otherwise, your assumptions about this world will be shattered and you feel insecurity and fear about living in this unsafe world. So now your mind is trying to tell you that, look, this has happened to that individual. It will not happen to you because you have been nice. Because you're being nice, only good things will happen to you. Because that individual who has been victimized has committed, must have done something wrong. Otherwise, why will this happen to her? Right? So, because she has behaved in a bad manner, an unacceptable, unapproving manner, and so the victimization happened to her. Right? So, this is how your mind tries to justify and rationalize why some things happen to other people, and you can conveniently shift the blame onto the victim and say that this is your fault. Had you behaved nicely, had you wear proper clothes, had you come back home before 7 p.m., right? If you not had gone to this particular house, this particular individual's house at the middle of the night, you would not have been victimized. So this is how your mind tells you that it is the victim who needs to be blamed because if they have been behaved properly, behaved well, this would not have happened to them. So we engage in that process, we engage in morality constructing act, which is one crucial determinant of sympathy. right? And for the sympathy, to gain sympathy, the individual needs to be blameless. I've given another example in the earlier slides, right? If there is an individual who is considered to be immoral or bad, it is very difficult for you to get sympathy for that person. So is the person at fault or the victim is the question that you constantly ask. And mostly to restore your worldview, you're going to take the side of yourself, not the victim, and you blame the victim for whatever victimization that the individual has gone through. The next slide, please. Now, what if this guide our understanding and attitude towards a victim? That our belief that this world is a just place and good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people, right? If our belief system is this, and if you are guided by this kind of understanding, right, it is very, very natural that it will reflect in our attitude, especially if these are the attitudes that are carried by the helping professional individuals. I do a lot of capacity building training for people in victim support centers, the staff of the victim support centers. I work on the attitudinal and the behavioral component of how they engage with the victims. And this is a very, very important determinant to understand how these belief systems and stereotypes guide their behavior in terms of engaging in supporting the victims. So it's important to pay very, very close attention, right? And it's important to understand that these ideas and beliefs have carry that power in terms of determining our actions. So it's important to be very, very careful. Now we'll slowly shift to the ideal victim status proposed by Niels Christie. We talked about social construction, we talked about belief in just world theory. Now we'll be talking particularly about how this ideal status of a victim is colored by the media, how media plays a very, very important role in shaping a particular victimizing scenario, right? And elevate it to an ideal victim status or not give a credit and not give a victim status to this individual. How media ignores or media highlights particular stories and elevate them to a victim level status and not give them a status, right? This is what we are going to look at in the next 10-15 minutes. So if you all familiar with, can recall your memories, in December 2012 in India, there is a gruesome gang rape which has been committed against a 23-year-old female physiotherapist by 6 men in a moving bus. And she was accompanied by a male friend of hers, and the male friend was severely beaten and thrown out of the bus. And these 6 men, including a juvenile, an underage minor, was also part of this act. All these 6 people have committed a gang rape against this 23-year-old female physiotherapist the middle of the night on December 16th, 2012. And this is one incident which has shook the entire nation, and there was civil unrest, mass protests that were happening across the country, and the media has taken certain stand in terms of projecting this victim in a certain light. That is what we are going to talk about in the next few slides. And it is very, very interesting phenomena to understand how media selects a particular narrative, particular victim story to get highlight and ignores other stories and does not consider them to be sensationalizing enough or sympathy seeking enough or deserving enough and not bring them to the visible society, right? So this is not just about the media. It's about whose suffering matters, whose trauma gets believed, and who receives justice in the end of the day, right? And media is playing that role in terms of filtering these narratives, these trauma narratives of the victims, and choosing which ones need to get highlighted and which ones cannot get that credit and become highlighted, right? So that is an exercise which media engages day to day. And so Niels Christie's ideal victim, like I said, is a Norwegian criminologist. So according to him, justice operates like scripted drama, right? Certain victims evoke stronger emotional responses and receive greater media attention based on predictable characteristics, and is given 6 core attributes to determine victim ideality. So the ideal victims must carry these 6 characteristics according to Niels Christie. The next slide, please. The next one. Yeah. So 6 core attributes determining the victim ideality, which is proposed by Niels Christie, right? So according to him, he said that justice operates simply like a scripted drama. There is a script, there is a character. Some characters evoke stronger emotions in us, and some do not have that kind of impact. Similarly, the society also chooses which of these characters, which of these victims have that kind of impact, emotional impact on them, right? So there has to be certain characteristics which will drive our emotions towards the victim. According to Niels Christie, there are 6 attributes, right? The next slide. Okay, the first one is the weakness, right? Physically being weak. So a victim uh, is considered a victim, only this person is physically weak, right? And so there are certain groups, certain categories of people who are considered physically weak and vulnerable, like, for example, children, elderly, women, disabled, sick, all of them are considered to be weaker categories, vulnerable groups. The second is virtuous engagement, meaning at the time of victimization, right, at the time that the crime is happening, this victim must be engaged in a meaningful, respectable project, right? He should not have been engaged in a risky behavior, which means he should not have been intoxicated. He should not have a habit of taking drugs. He's not under the influence of any particular drug, or he is not a gang member who is putting himself in a risky situation, right? So that act which the victim was participating at the time of victimization must be a decent activity, right? Which cannot cast any blame on this victim, right? Cannot point back and say that, look, you've been engaging in this particular activities and because of which you've been victimized. It should not be that kind of scenario, right? No responsibility is the third attribute. Victim did not contribute to their own harm. There is no way that you can say that this particular behavior of the victim has invited this particular individual to cause harm to this individual. So that kind of correlations you cannot draw by analyzing that particular situation, right? So victims have to be physically weak. They have to be engaged in a respectable project, right? No responsibility whatsoever can be attributed to the victim, and you cannot blame them for causing their own victimization. The next slide. And the fourth attribute is isolation from perpetrator, which means there is no relation whatsoever to the perpetrator. They are not related, right? It's not the family member who is committed victimization against the victim, right? It's not the friend who is harmed this individual. So it has to be a stranger, right? So the perpetrator needs to be an unfamiliar individual, a complete stranger, for you to easily attribute the victim status to this victim. Weak social status. The victim belongs to a low social community, right? Lower hierarchy social status, right? It's easy to evoke sympathy, but this is debatable. Higher social status individuals also get victim status very easily. Like, for example, in the case of celebrity, right? Media chooses to print these sensational narratives of victims who are celebrities, right? So weak social status is one which can be contradicting in some situations. Moral purity, again, it comes down to the character of an individual. The character must be flawless for the individual. You should not be able to trace back and say that, look, these were the times where the victim has misbehaved, victims have certain things going on, which could have attracted the offender and caused the victimization. You cannot have that kind of reasons. It has to be completely blameless act and blameless character that the individual must possess for you to give them a status of a victim. So these are the 6 characteristics. One, the victim needs to be physically weak in comparison to the perpetrator. And two, the victim must be engaged in a respectable project at the time of the victimization. Three, they are not related. They're completely different from the perpetrator. There is no relation whatsoever. They're completely strangers. There has to be weak social status, and there is moral purity in terms of the character of this individual. When these 6 characteristics meet, right, and it's now this particular individual is qualified to get the victim's status. So according to Niels Christie, an ideal victim is the one who meets all the 6 attributes criteria, right? Now, if you look at the next slide, now if you look at how media constructs ideality, ideal victim status, how media constructs it, right? The first step in terms of media constructing an ideal victim status of an individual is narrative framing and storytelling, right? How does this victim narrative, victim story is being projected in the print or in the multimedia channels, right? In television, how is it being portrayed? What is the stand that the media house is taking in terms of narrating the story? How are they projecting? What kind of impression, what kind of image are they creating around the victim, right? Media selects details to construct emotional narrative arc, right? Language choices reveal and shape victims' worthiness. Like, for example, in the case of Nirbhaya, gang rape in India, if you look at initially, the media has started off by describing the gruesomeness of this particular act, particular victimization, right? Intestines were taken out, private parts were damaged, right? And the victim had to undergo multiple surgeries. In the process of recovering, she never recovered and she succumbed to death, right? Which is a different story altogether. But yeah, so the narratives that is pushed down onto the society by the media is that the initial narration is about how severe this particular act of victimization was, the horrific violence. Later on, they moved to talking about courageous survivor, and they even named this particular victim, maintaining the anonymity. They never revealed a true name of this victim, but they called the media called her as Nirbhaya, which means fearless. The emphasis is on the victim now. So initially, the emphasis is on the victimizing elements to garner the attention of the society. And then they moved and started describing the characteristics of how she fought during the victimization process, how she is fighting throughout the recovery process, right? How she has helped in terms of the investigation and helped in catching the offenders, right? So projecting a victim as a courageous, brave individual. The next stage moved on to symbolic injustice, right? How the rate of victimization, sexual victimization against women and children in India has been highlighted in the media frequently, right? So there has been a narrative which is constructed around activism, social activism in terms of moving towards putting pressure on the governments to act on safety of women in our country. So there's a lot of movement, social movement, societal movement, which has been triggered by the media narrations. And so it has definitely led to a positive stage, right? Which we'll talk about in a moment. But it also has side effects. It has also have downsides of negativities of careful media selection and highlighting only particular number of victims and conveniently ignoring other victims who deserve to have the equal status, right? And there were several instances of victim blaming questions which were portrayed in the media. Media also reflected the societal values or beliefs also at some stance, which has also contributed to the activism. So it has highlighted very, very strongly and rejected the notions of secondary victimization very, very strongly during the time around the Nirbhaya movement. Next slide. The second step is media gatekeeping and case selection. How does media decide on which story to get published, which story should get, which narrative, which victim story should get the limelight, right? How does media does that kind of selection, right? So the same year in 2012, when the Nirbhaya incident happened, in India, we've had 2,500 rape cases reported formally, right? So we had 2,500 rape cases in that country in that year when Nirbhaya incident happened, right? Only about 100 of those 2,500 cases were selected by the media for reporting, right? Now, how does this happen, right? How can uh, what determines the media to choose a particular story and ignore the other stories, right? Who deserves sympathy and who does not deserve sympathy? How can media decide that? How can a newspaper or a print media or a media publishing house, how can they decide on whose stories are more deserving than other stories, right? But this is what happens in reality, right? And if you look at Indonesian context in 2016, I'm sure you must have been aware of the university case, which I'll be talking about in a while, which has received definitely a good amount of attention because of the institutional affiliation and because of the student movement activism that has been happening in the university and around. So because of it, the media has to pay closer attention to this particular case. But if you look at domestic workers, intimate partner violence cases in India, Indonesia, they don't get the deserving limelight. They don't get this kind of sympathy, right? But how does certain cases and certain particular cases only get reported and get the limelight and ignored? Other things are ignored, right? So selection criteria that the media houses can apply could include the victim profile. Who is this victim? What is the background of this victim? Is this a celebrity? Is this a person belonging to higher social status? Or is this person belonging to a lower social status? What can catch the attention of my readers, viewers, right? And crime severity, how severe this particular case is. Like, for example, in Nirbhaya, it is described as one of the heinous crimes that have been committed in the recent modern history of India against an individual, right? The severity of that particular crime is so heinous, right? There is no way that the media cannot report that because it is an interest matter of the public. right? And audience identification, how much does it resonate with the audiences? How much this story is appealing to this general public, right? And newsworthiness, whether this particular story, victim narrative, has this newsworthy quality or not. Can this be reported? Can this be interesting to my audience, right? So you have a different take that the media houses follow in terms of publishing a particular article about a victimization of an individual, right? So they have their own criteria. Okay. So, and it is not definitely guided by humanitarian, it's not definitely guided by sympathy, right? So it has its own criteria to publish, select certain victim narratives to get into the live stream. Next slide. And language and descriptive choices that the media houses play. So they can create sympathy for an individual and uh, ascribe victim status. They can also marginalize the particular individual and not pave that way for having a victim status. Both are possible through media representations, right? Ideal victim language could include courageous, innocent, unblemished, fighter. It could be an active voice giving agency to the victim, like she went to work, right? And this happened. Okay, so the choice of language used and the choice of agency that is attributed to the victim, all of that play a very, very important role. Non-ideal victim language, risky choices, right? Where you are trying to create that complex zone, where the demarcations are not very, very clear in terms of who is an offender and who is a perpetrator, who is a victim, right? Whether it is a victim motivated crime. So you're creating that blur lines in terms of making it a complicated judgment process for an individual to think who is really a victim here, right? So risky choices can complicate that kind of situation, and there is passive voice ascribed to the victim, like she was raped. The agency is not given, and the victimhood is not given very easily. And victimhood, if it's given, it is given without agency. So the result of this exercise of the media constructing the ideal status of the victim is that same trauma is getting described differently based on the victim identity. So it depends on who the victim, and then you build the story around who the victim is, right? So deservingness of sympathy is determined by the medium in its construction of that particular narrative of the victim. The next slide. So if you look at the non-ideal victims, right, and they have been structurally invisible, you have so many categories of victims who have not been who we have discomfort in terms of clearly seeing them as victims because the lines are very, very blurred and you don't easily consider them and see them as victims if you keep that context of ideal victim and 6 different attributes and characters given by Niels Christie, right? So we consciously or unconsciously are thinking on those lines. So victim needs to be blameless. Victim needs to be engaging in an act which is respectful, right? During the victimization. All of these criteria and categories will determine your judgment in terms of seeing a particular individual as a victim or not. Like, for example, if you take sex workers, right? How many of us see that sex workers are victims, right? We have difficulties in terms of seeing them as victims, although they are victims. There are acts that are committed against sex workers during the process of their profession, right? Which can easily qualify for victimization. And it is very easy to see them as the victims if you think from that perspective. But because of the barriers that we create in our mind of the ideal victim status, right, it is not possible for us to see sex workers easily as victims, even though there are victimizing elements, harm causing elements that were endured by these individuals. Intimate partner violence and domestic violence, right? We all have difficulty in terms of seeing domestic violence victims as ideal victims because we immediately the question that we ask ourselves is that why do they stay in this abusive relationship? Why can't they divorce? Why are they preferring to stay with this individual if they have been harming them, violating them, right? Causing violence against them? Why are they staying with this individual, right? So you are trying to attribute blame on this individual who have been victimized, and by choosing to stay with this individual and be in that relationship, right? Which is complicating that your process of seeing them as victims. Marginalized communities, like for example, LGBTQI communities, it's very difficult for you to uh, uh, go beyond your stereotypical thinking and see them as victims. There are definitely clearly victimizing elements that they are going through day in and day out, but it's very difficult for us to see them as easily victims. and those with risky lifestyles, like for example, members of a gang, drug addicts, right? So all of these carry a risky lifestyles, and we don't readily see them as victims, even though they can be potential victims. Consequences of this structural invisibility, because these structures create this invisible victims, right? Because you're not giving them that visibility of seeing themselves as victims. These are invisible victims, and there is no media protection. Blame shifting easily happens towards victims. Impunity for perpetrators, those who are causing harm against these individual categories, they're going scot-free because you're not recognizing this victim status of the individual. If you're not giving a victim status, there is no offender status as well. There is no perpetrator. There is no crime committed. There is not a social problem, right? It comes back of an action of normalcy. No policy accountability. You don't have to do anything about it, right? Because you don't even recognize them as victims. So you don't have any obligation in terms of serving them. You don't have to make policies to make their lives better, right? The moment you see that this is a particular social problem, these are victims. Now your governments have to be driven to create policies to support, save, right? Empower, protect them, right? Provide these victim support services. There is a whole lot of things that the government will be obligated to do the moment they see themselves as these individuals as victims. The moment they see LGBTQI communities as victims of certain victimizing elements, right, they have to create policies to ensure safety of these individuals. The moment they see that sex workers can also carry risk of victimization in their profession, they have to ensure that their lives are secured, they're not harmed during their work, right? There is a whole lot of policies that the governments need to now think about it, right? So the moment a social act is seen as a problem, as a social problem, there is a whole lot of policy level changes the government will have to start thinking about it. The moment if they don't see that, right, there is no way that the governments can be forced in terms of doing or creating anything for these categories of individuals. The next slide. Yeah, so we have talked about this particular case, the 2012 gang rape case in India, Nirbhaya, right? So I've described this case for you. Okay. The positive side of media excessively highlighting this particular case is that we have certain policy level changes, right? Fast track courts have been set up following Nirbhaya incident. Anti-rape laws, law amendments have been done, and anti-rape laws have been made stricter. There is harsher punishments, including the death penalty for heinous of the heinous crimes, now has been done under the law, right? And setting up of Saki one-stop centers, victim support centers, is also following the Nirbhaya incident, right? So definitely, if the media aligns the stories of the victim as close to as ideal victims, okay, it has the potential to drive policy level changes in the governments. Okay, it can put that kind of impact on the governments to ensure that policy implications do follow up, do come as a consequence of these media narratives that are created, right? The unfortunate is a very, very important thing, right? By as close to as ideal victim, you are raising the bar of the ideal victim for other victims who do not meet that kind of criteria, right? Which means you're entering that space of risk where you are risking not recognizing many number of victims as victims because they do not share the ideal characteristics of an ideal victim, right? So it has its positives in terms of channelizing, mobilizing, activism driven policy. So all of this is possible if the media highlights a particular story and creates an image of ideal victim, right? And leading to activism and leading to policy making, all of that is possible. The risk that I mentioned is also inevitable. It's very much real. By doing that, you're also raising the standards, the expectations, right, from the society in terms of who they can see as an ideal victim, right? So if an individual do not meet these 6 characteristics that Niels Christie has described in his ideal victim status, right? So you as an individual or a society now has the difficulty to see this victim as an ideal victim. There is cast of doubt on your mind to see them as victims. So now why Nirbhaya achieved ideal victim status? It's if you apply the Niels Christie's ideal victim concept, right? She was weak, There were 6 men who gang raped her, right? Definitely she is physically weak. She also belongs to a female category, gender. Female gender is considered, naturally it is considered weaker than a male gender, right? Physically weaker than a male gender. And then there were 6 men. Definitely she was overpowered. Virtuous engagement. She was returning from watching a movie and she is traveling in a public transport, right? Nothing to be blamed. There is no behavior that you can say that this is wrong, this is unacceptable, you shouldn't be doing that. No, she was going to a movie, watched a movie and coming back, which is an acceptable act. She has taken public transport, right? There is nothing wrong in that. No responsibility whatsoever, right? Impossible to self-defend against multiple attackers. It's not that she has taken a knife and tried to stab them, because of which they in turn caused physical injuries to them. No, she was defenseless. 6 individuals, right, overpowered completely. She was physically weak. She could not resist. She could not do anything, right? There is nothing that could cast doubt on this individual's behavior during the time of victimization. Isolation, right? These are the 6 people who are completely strangers to this girl, right? None of them she had known before, right? They're complete strangers. Okay. Moral purity. She is a student, physiotherapy student, completing her education, has career aspirations, right? All of this has increased audience identification, right? Definitely the middle class, common public are able to relate to this. What if my daughter is in this position, right? What if I, as a girl who is walking out, who is working in a call center and having to come to my home in the middle of the night, what if I face this kind of situation, right? It creates that kind of unsafe space for you to live in, right? It has definitely struck chords with larger number of the people, and so that is why you have the mass protest happened in our country, right? So this is one ideal victim narrative that is pushed on by the media very, very strongly, and it has led to definitely positive implications and positive changes in our legal systems, which is definitely praiseworthy. But like I said, there are definitely negatives of this as well, right? So in Nirbhaya presentation, media representation, next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So the 4 phases of media narrative, which was followed in the case of Nirbhaya, like I said earlier, sensationalism. The first phase was the graphic description of trauma narrative, right? So there were newspapers which has published about how gruesome this particular incident was, right? How physically outrageous this act was, right? What happened to the body of the victim, right? How torturously this act was committed on this individual. These are descriptives, graphic descriptions that the media houses used in the initial representation of this particular victimization. In the second phase, the narrative has completely shifted. Now they're talking about activism, right? How Nirbhaya is putting up a fight, right? How she has resisted, how she is courageous, right? How can this happen to you as well if you let this happen, right? As a society collectively, what we need to do in terms of preventing this in future daughters and sisters of ours, right? That is the kind of media narrative that was printed, shown repeatedly, right, to create that kind of impact in the society. Phase three was legal and policy driven changes, right? Through activism, it was possible to bring about fast track court setups, sentencing reforms. International scrutiny also made it very, very tough to the governments, and they have succumbed to the pressure and they had to do something about it. That is why you have a lot of women empowerment schemes, women safety programs that were launched in India following Nirbhaya incident, and even setting up of victim support centers like Sakhi One Stop Crisis Centers, right? And the fourth phase was giving a lasting memory of this particular instance. Like for example, there is a documentary which was made on Nirbhaya incident. It's called India's Daughter, okay, which has created a permanent memory of this particular incident, right? So media has made conscious efforts in terms of creating a lasting permanent memory of this particular incident on the minds of the individuals, right? So every year on December 16th, on the day that the Nirbhaya incident has happened, newspapers still publish the reports, still publish the news about that particular incident and what has happened since then, drawing comparisons to the current situation of women in our country, right? Drawing some kind of statistical comparisons in terms of what is the reality now from Nirbhaya. So Nirbhaya is never out of our sight and out of our mind, right? Media has a way in terms of bringing it alive to us every year, right? So that's the kind of power that the media can hold in terms of pushing down a particular narrative and creating that lasting impacts in our mind, right? Unfortunately, the media cannot do that with every deserving victim, although they are deserving because they fall short of Niels Christie's ideal victim status. That is a drawback of this entire narrative as such. So the four phases of media narrative that we just discussed. Next slide. Yep. Yeah. So these are some of the media. Sorry, the previous slide. So these are some of the newspaper clippings which has highlighted that four phases of media narrative, particularly talking about Nirbhaya incident. Next slide. Yeah, so we've talked about this. So the downside of this highly, heavily weighing one-sided narrative of ideal victim status is that the other side, the minority categories, will not get the deserving sympathy, will not get the deserving light of the day, right? So what remained invisible? Dalit women certainly, about 2 to 3 times higher rape rates, but there is minimal coverage by the media, right? Because they belong to lower social categories, right? Nobody cares about them. It doesn't matter. They're not interesting for the media houses to get published, right? Nobody wants to, there is no curiosity. There is no interesting element. There is no attention catching element in their stories, right? Muslim women is easily colored as a communal violence, right? Rather than seeing it as a gender violence, right? Rural women, zero urban media outreach, right? Sex workers, because their act in itself is a criminalizable activity, they're not protected, right? And it's very difficult for us to see them as naturally as victims. The next slide. Now we look at Indonesian perspective in terms of how Indonesian media handles this victims' narratives. Right, it's different from how the Indian media handled certain famous cases there. Right, so there is definitely cultural, religious, gender dimensions that are influencing the media narratives in the Indonesian context. We'll take two references to one university case, which I'm guessing that you all must be familiar with, and some historical context in terms of the mass sexual atrocities that were committed against Chinese minority women, right, in Indonesian context. We will look at these two references and see how the media has played a role in terms of creating and pushing down that narrative of victim status. The next slide. So political transition violence, especially catering to ethnic Chinese women, right? Media responses during then, this is way back in 1998, right? So the media responses were that they blamed victims for provocative clothing, you know. So which means, so it is the job of the women to control the desire of men by wearing clothes properly, right? So it comes down to that understanding by the society that if men rape women, it is because women are getting into that risky spaces by provocating men to commit crimes against them, right? So which is certainly not what it should be like, but you still see some kind of references from the media publishers, right? Having made references to victim blaming tendencies, victim blaming ideas in terms of description of victims' characteristics. Okay, the result is that there is double victimization, double trauma, societal blame, plus fear of seeking help, fear of even reporting that particular violence. Imagine a victim, a female victim going through an incident of rape, now hesitates to report that case or discuss that case even with the family members because of fear of getting blamed by own family members or not being believed or casting blame and finding fault at them, right? So it can push people away from seeking help and even reporting. Survivors, in the case of 1998 case, they fled country. Some even attempted suicide. There are suppressed memories. People pretend to go on with their lives normally, but they know that they are deep down hurt, traumatic by traumatic injuries. Right. The next slide. Okay. So the UGM case, University of Gadjamada student, right? This particular student, it's also a famous case in Indonesia. I'm sure some of you must be aware of it, right? How media portrayed this particular case. So it's not that instantly there is a lot of attention that is given to this particular case, but later on, because of the pressure from the student body and the student-run magazine in the university has investigated this particular instance, and they've also found that this particular perpetrator, who is a professor of this student who has done sexual harassment against this girl, right, was found to have been doing this particular behavior, engaging in this particular behavior with several other female students in the university, which has created that outrageous environment in the student, and the students pressurized the university administration to act. And there is news that is published in the internal magazines of the university, which has to create that pressure in the common regular medias to take up these stories and get it published, right? But there was not a completely satisfactory outcome in this particular endeavor. So there are several other reports which says that even though the government has suspended, the university has suspended that particular professor for this harassing behavior, right? He's still on the payrolls of the university, which means he's not terminated from his employment, right? So it's half satisfying action that is taken by the university administration in this particular case, but the media did play a certain role in terms of creating a narrative around this victimization, right? Here, if you look at this, why media has shown interest in this is that it is an educated victim. Institutional context made it newsworthy. Student activism also mobilized these media houses to pick up this story, right? But it is still inconsistent. Like I said, the coverage remained inconsistent and victim blaming also persisted, right? So it is also equated to dishonor, and people have also, like for example, Me Too movement in Indonesia. When Me Too movement was happening, the victims were blamed for causing dishonor to the community, dishonor to the society, dishonor to the institutions, right? Damaging the reputation of the institutions. There is a lot of victim blaming which was also happening in Me Too movements in Indonesia, which is why the movement could not take that required activist perspectives, the required activist force was not propelled in this social activizing activities, right? So the next slide. So structural victim blaming in media is what you recurringly see in media narratives of victim presentations. A patriarchal framing, certainly, women portrayed as passive victims, not active agency survivors. They're not given agency. They're seen as mere passive victims. Responsibility shifting, certainly women put themselves at risk versus perpetrators choosing violence, right? So it's always the woman who has invited this risk, not the perpetrator who has chosen to cause harm to this individual. That is the kind of media representation, media narrative that you see in Indonesian media publishers. Uh, Marginalized victim erasure, definitely, both in India and Indonesia, you see this kind of erasure happening in terms of marginalized victims. Perpetrator narrative privilege, media amplifies perpetrator's version and victim blamed as provocation, right? Like in terms of the example of clothing, for example, right? So there is the provocating element is that victims wearing short clothes, which is making these men behave in certain ways, right? So these are some of the structural victim blaming tendencies that we see in Indonesian media about sexual violence, about female victims and children. The next slide. Now, this ideal victim status or the media representation of victims in a particular light are not giving them deserving victim sympathy. How does this impact justice and policies? That the media sensationalism reduces victim cooperation in investigation. Certainly. If you're over enthused about a particular thing, right? The kind of projections the kind of descriptions that you make in your newspaper or in your TV about this particular victim can create that space of non-cooperation from the victim. They can be dissuaded in terms of not participating in these justice mechanisms and justice processes. Graphic media coverage impacts victim mental health during interventions, definitely, right? This graphical descriptions, representation of what happened during the victimization can create that lasting psychological impact and create mental health challenges for the victims. Influences police response, certainly, media has that power in terms of directing a particular story in a particular direction, right? Affects court outcomes. Media trials is a common phenomenon that we see these days. Before the judge could pass a judgment, the media has decided who the convict is, right? And what punishment should be awarded to them, right? So there is media trial, which is very, very powerful social phenomena that you see. Affects court outcomes, certainly, shapes compensation and rehabilitation, definitely, right? If the media does not highlight a particular victim as a victim, right, then that person cannot claim the right to be supported, right to victim compensation, right to rehabilitation, cannot be guaranteed to that individual because the first step of recognizing them as a victim is weak. Secondary victimization from media can impede evidence collection. From the forensic psychology, forensic investigation perspective, you see that there are a lot of other challenges as well. Victims may not cooperate in terms of investigative processes, which can color the entire justice outcomes. Moving beyond the ideal victim status, the next slide. What we need is trauma-informed journalism. Certainly, these media houses need to be very much aware of trauma sensitivities. But more than that, it is also a collective social responsibility, right? Media is no exclusion from the societal representation, right? Media is part of the society. They reflect our societal values, shared values and beliefs, and what interests our society is what gets reflected in the media's publications, right? So more than putting the obligation on the journalists and the media houses to be sensitive, it is a society which needs to be sensitive and trauma informed. Media literacy certainly understand how media narratives affect victim cooperation, right? How it can have a lasting impact on the justice outcomes, and how it can create the permanent impressions on the victim's mind, and they can never approach, never trust a police, never trust a journalist, right? That is a kind of lasting impact you will create if you're not careful. Intersectional perspectives, certainly there are several intersecting elements, especially with vulnerable groups, which gets conveniently ignored, right? Which needs to be given a lot of attention. Victim-centered justice approaches is the way forward, certainly. The next question, next slide. So before we close, these are some of the questions that I would like to pose to the audience. Who decides victim legitimacy, right? Who gets to decide what victim is legitimate? Who is worthy of deserving our sympathy? Can media challenge the stereotypes instead of taking side of the stereotypes and propelling the stereotypes? Can media also be in that space where it can challenge the societal stereotypes? We see some media houses taking the stand, but not all media houses are taking the stand of discarding this stereotypical thinking, or challenging this stereotypical thinking in the common public, right? They don't do that. They become they fall for sensationalism, and the entertainment becomes the driving element in terms of media reportings. What responsibilities do journalists have? They carry a greater responsibility in terms of ensuring that equal treatment of all victims. How would you design a system protecting all victims, not just the ideal ones? So that is the space that we have to aim to reach. So we cannot have a moral compass, or the media cannot have a filtering mechanism in terms of deciding who gets to be treated nicely, who gets to have a victim status, who gets to have receive the support of the justice mechanisms, right? So that kind of filtering cannot be done. You have to you have to put the victimization in the center, the pain and the suffering in the center as a detrimental, as the determining features in terms of deciding who is a victim and who is not a victim. It's not the caste, it's not the color, it's not the individual characteristics, it's not the ideal victim characteristics that we all understand, right? They should not be the guiding force. The victimizing, the pain, the suffering, and the harm that is committed, right, against an individual should be the central driving force in terms of deciding who a victim is, right? So if you move closer towards ideal victim characteristics and try to search these ideal victim characteristics in the victim, right, we are doing injustice to the victim, right? And all victims for that matter. So it's important to understand that ideal victim is a reality, but it's also important to understand that we should move away from the ideal victim status and not look through that lens in terms of determining who a victim is, right? Because there are so many victims who does not fit into the ideal victim status, but they are victims because of the victimization that they have endured. There are real damages which needs to be compensated. There are real damages which needs to be healed. There are real damages which needs treatment, right? So it's important for us to see what is the harm done to this victim, which should ultimately determine whether this person is a victim or not this ideal statuses, not these ideal characteristics that we look for in an individual to give them a deserving sympathy or to give them a victim status. Next slide. Yeah. So sympathy, like all this, sympathy is also socially constructed. It's important to be very, very careful, right? Media can either humanize or marginalize, which we understood from our examples as well. And justice certainly requires recognizing all victims, extending beyond the narrow template of ideal victim. This is what I was referring to when I was talking about how it's important to move away from ideal victim characteristics. Instead, you should not be searching for these characteristics, but rather look for whether there is suffering, whether there is pain, whether there is harm done, whether there is damage, right? who deserves sympathy is a simple question, but it is very, very difficult to answer. And the answer reveals who we are as a society, right? Who deserves sympathy depends on who we are as a society, how our societal values and societal beliefs are formed, right? What we believe in is a victimizing element. What we believe in is a victim characteristics. All of that will determine who will deserve sympathy in the end of the day. Okay. So that is all from me. And I have an announcement. So this is the third international conference on global criminology and victimology, which I'm a chair of this conference. It will happen in India, in a place called Baroda in July, end of July, 27th to 31st of July. We have this conference. I will share this information through Professor Yoga. In case if you are interested, you can consider joining this conference in India. We'll be very, very happy to host you. And for all our international participants, we will provide accommodation at free of cost. You don't have to pay for accommodation. We will provide accommodation to you if you're an international participant. So you all can join this conference, and so it's a nice place. It's a good conference. This is the third year, and I welcome you all to join this conference in July this year. And terima kasih. Thank you so much for listening to me. And if you have some questions, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you so much, Professor Banu. That's a very, very interesting topic. Well, of course, because it's about the victimizations. Ladies and gentlemen, before I draw a conclusion or I read, maybe just a very short, I would like to announce you again, those who are interested to participate as the speakers, of course, right, or presenters in the conference, your conference, Professor Banu.
Yes.
Yep. And Professor Banu, the committee will provide free accommodations. Yep.
Yes.
Free accommodations for how many days during the program? I mean, 2 or 3 days?
5 days. So there is a workshop,
5
a
days.
2-day workshop, and a 3-day conference. So we will provide accommodation for 5 nights, free of cost, in case if you are interested in joining us. Yeah.
Oh, that's so great, so nice of you. Thank you so much, Pak Dekan. Ini Pak Dekan, halo Pak Dekan. Pak Dekan, Pak Dekan ini ditawari Prof Banu. Let me speak in Bahasa Indonesia. Allow me to speak in Bahasa Indonesia. I ask your permission, Professor Banu. Pak Dekan, halo. Pak Dekan, Mbak Merin, Pak Dekan ini nggak, Pak Dekan. Soalnya ada di ini, ada di.
Wait, I will call him.
Iya, Pak Dekan. Emang kan beliau interested ya. Atau mungkin ada Bu Susi atau Bu Fajar ya. Jadi Prof Banu itu menawarkan Bapak Ibu free accommodation, Pak Dekan. Jadi Pak Dekan, jadi ini Prof Banu menawari free accommodations untuk 5 hari di India untuk conference. Tadi international conference in July, right? July, and I think in July, July 2026 selama 5 hari free. Do we have to pay the conference fee?
Registration fee, yes. Yes.
Oh, registration fee.
Registration fee, yeah.
Okay, but the accommodations will be free. Okay. Jadi hanya membayar conference fee, tapi akomodasi selama 5 hari. Nanti kita cek di how much is the session fee, Professor Banu? Is it written in the brochure?
In the website. Poster? I'll send you the link for the website.
Okay, thank you. Jadi Pak Dekan, monggo.
Pak Dekan sudah bisa ngobrol dengan.
Ya. Oke, Pak Dekan, ini Prof Banu memberi tawaran. Ada conference di bulan Juli. Kalau ada yang tertarik, 5 hari gratis akomodasi di India untuk mengikuti sesi workshop sama conference di sana. Tapi otomatis kirim abstrak dan lain-lain. Nanti saya kirimkan linknya. Tapi tiket pesawat dari tanggung ya Pak. Tiket pesawat. Kalau tiket pesawat sendiri, hanya akomodasi saja.
Iya, wis oke
Oke.
oke Bu. Siap nanti
Ya,
diskusi lagi.
nanti
Oke oke.
saya share nggih,
Siap.
maturun Pak Dekan.
Hmm.
Okay, and yes, Professor Banu, thank you so much for the information. Jadi saya bacakan kesimpulannya ya. I will read a little bit short conclusions about this presentation of Professor Banu presentations today. That the ideal victim stereotype, as shaped by media narratives and societal beliefs, creates I think a hierarchy of victimhood where sympathy and justice are selectively granted. Figures like Nirbhaya, as you presented today to us in India, for example, our student university students in Indonesia gain visibility by fitting criteria like weakness, innocence, and respectability, while marginalized victims such as sex workers, domestic violence survivors, or ethnic minorities remain invisible. Yeah, there are many cases in Indonesia about this. And this bias not only perpetuates injustice and victim blaming, but also hinders systemic change. While moving forward, a trauma-informed intersectional approach in media and justice system is very essential to ensure all victims and recognize, protected, and dignified. Let me share in bahasa Indonesia. Jadi ada stereotip korban ideal yang dibentuk oleh media, narasi media, tidak keyakinan masyarakat sehingga menciptakan hierarki korban di mana simpati dan keadilan diberikan secara selektif ya. Tadi kayaknya apa namanya sesuai dengan pertanyaannya Mas siapa tadi ya. Nanti saya bacakan atau nanti dibacakan sendiri karena bahasa Inggris cukup bagus. Jadi tokoh seperti Nirbhaya di India, contoh kasus ya Nirbhaya di India atau tadi ada di UGM ya mahasiswa tertentu di Indonesia betul UGM contohnya mendapat sorotan karena ya itu tadi memenuhi kriteria kelemahan, ketidakbersalahan atau keterhormatan ya. Sementara korban yang termarginalkan nih, jangan kayak saya nih nanti misalnya ya tidak punya duit ya atau seperti pekerja seks lah ya prostitut di kita itu kan dimarginalkan sekali ketika mereka menjadi korban. Kemudian penyintas kekerasan dalam rumah tangga nih rata-rata ya. Jadi kalau karena patriarchal system juga ya kalau ada kekerasan dalam rumah tangga biasanya istrinya yang disalahkan karena nggak bla 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 bla. Sebenarnya mereka juga korban ya. Atau kelompok minoritas yang memang tidak terlihat di Indonesia contohnya. Nah, bias ini tidak hanya melanggengkan ketidakadilan dan menyalahkan korban, tapi menghambat perubahan sistemik. Nah, ke depan nih yang punya link ke jurnalisme ya dan sistem peradilan nih mahasiswa hukum dan bapak ibu di Fakultas Hukum yang sadar yang tentunya lebih hebat ya kalau saya kan bukan dari hukum jadi agak tersendat-sendat menerangkannya yang sadar trauma serta perspektif interseksional dan sangat penting untuk memastikan bahwa semua korban termasuk yang invisible tadi yang tidak terlihat itu diakui, dilindungi dan dimuliakan. Saya tuh sebenarnya agak terharu loh dengan this topic is very touching for me because I'm a woman especially and there are so many cases of rape that happened not only in Indonesia, maybe in India too, and also in the world that the blaming victims are always women. I don't know why. I think you have explained based on your presentation. Professor Banu, we have a question here. Operator minta tolong dong yang Fikri Hastaria 3D bisa dimunculkan. Sebenarnya ini menarik loh ya, mahasiswa hukum ini terutama adik-adik nih, cewek-cewek ini cewek-cewek ya, cewek-cewek. Nah, kan banyak sekali kasus di Indonesia. Ini bisa dimunculkan yang Fikri Hastaria. Halo? Fikri, are you there? Mbak Merlin, bisa dibantu Fikrinya?
Mas Fikri, halo.
Mas Fikri, halo.
Could you please show up?
Malu katanya ya. Ya malu, ini pinter banget loh pertanyaannya bagus ini. Baik, Professor Banu, Indonesians are mostly shy. I don't know, maybe Indians mostly side too. Okay.
Indians
Well,
also.
oh, okay. We have the question here actually in the chat box. I think in the past few years, let me read. We have seen that many cases of violence or victimization received a serious attention only after that. They went viral on social media. I don't know in India. Meanwhile, there are many other victims whose cases never go viral, and as a result, do not receive the same level of response or support. This creates the impressions that access to justice is shaped not only by legal mechanisms but also by public visibility and media exposure. This is correct. And Mike, the question is, how can the state ensure that victims who are not publicly visible or viral are still granted equal access to justice? This is a very good question. Professor Banu, this is the questions, please.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the question. And I think that is what the presentation is all about today. I mean,
Yes,
how do
yes,
we address this problem of over-representation of a particular case and under-representation of other cases? Who is deciding this? Who gets to choose this? And why some victim suffering is more deserving of visibility than others suffering, right? But this is the social reality that we are dealing with. This is not an ultimate ideal scenario that we would want to live with, right? All victims deserve equal sympathy because there is suffering, there is
yes,
victimization, there is pain, right? How can we decide which victim gets more deserving sympathy than the other victims? It's not. We should not have that kind of liberty in terms of deciding that, right? Unfortunately, the media houses do have that kind of liberty. They create or break these narratives around victim status very easily, conveniently ignore a particular story or highlight a particular story to gain that attention, right? That is an unfortunate reality of the society that we live in. But so, like I said, it is not again the media that we have to blame completely for. It is a society which has to share this collective responsibility of addressing this as a problem first. So it's important to see that this is a problem that media's over-representation or careful filtering of who is a victim, right, or publicizing, highlighting a particular story and not doing it for others, right? This careful selection should not be a power that is vested with the media, right? We have to see that as a social problem and then point out that, look, this is wrong. You cannot do that, right? You are setting the expectations by creating that ideal status of a victim. And whoever does not fit into that criteria will not qualify to become a victim by that logic, right? So if you're not recognizing an individual as a victim, which means you are not going to support them as well. If you don't
yes,
see them as a victims, how are you going to provide support to them? There is no victim compensation, there is no restitution, there is no counseling. Nothing follows
okay,
because they are not even recognized as a victim, right? So this is a larger problem. It is not just a media's problem. This is a problem of the society, and we all share collective responsibility in terms of addressing this problem. There is also a very important thing that because of the time that I could not address in my presentation, right? Now, media also extends to social media. It's not just the print and the TV that we are talking about, the social media. And social media has played both constructive and destructive role in terms of the victims' lives, right?
mhm,
You have people divided on the social media platforms, right?
yes,
Advocating for victims and discouraging and victim blaming as well at the
yeah,
same time,
mhm,
right?
mhm,
So
mhm,
ultimately, it boils down to individuals' careful exercise of the choice, careful exercise of the thoughts, right?
mhm,
And then being responsible and sensitive in terms of what they speak and what they do, both online and offline, right? So it's important to understand that, understand the impacts that you're leaving through your behavior on the other individual who is already suffering, already in pain. So if you don't act with that sensitivity, I think we are not building a better society for victims to live in,
okay,
right? So I say that it is not an individual's or a government responsibility. It is everybody's responsibility. We all share that
mhm,
collective responsibility to make this a world a better place for everyone, definitely for victims, right?
mhm. Okay. Thank you so much for the answer. So you suggest that we are as the individual better to responsible. So what we are going to talk in a social media regarding a certain case because it has a huge impacts on the victims. So we have to be fair in understanding the case, not easily judge about on surface what we are seeing on the certain
and
case.
and
Okay, jadi
and move away
mhm,
from
mhm,
and move away from this ideal victim narrative as much as possible,
mhm.
right? We cannot
Okay,
define a victim status using the ideal victim status because most of the victims will not meet this criteria, right? So you have
okay,
to know that there are victims who does not qualify ideal victim status. It doesn't mean that you cannot see them as victims, right? So that's
okay,
the
okay,
takeaway, right? Yeah.
okay. So you mean that the ideal victims here are, for example, those who are, I just give the example, those who are in a very good status, like the case of the students, but those who are invisible, like the domestic workers, yeah, they are not the ideal victims. That sometimes we
Yeah.
neglect them to be
Yeah.
defended. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you,
And there
Professor
are
Banu.
more non-ideal victims than ideal victims in the society,
Yes,
right?
yes, yeah.
So with that
Okay,
logic, you're ignoring a larger section of victims who deserve sympathy and victim support, right? So
yes.
yeah,
You are right. You are right. Because maybe the poverty line, the poverty percentage in a in certain countries, maybe much higher. For example, like in Indonesia, we have still have a big poverty line. So those who I think those are invisible for in front of the court. I mean, they're for getting idol victims. That's very hard for them in Indonesia, especially. I think in India will be the same. Jadi pertanyaannya, let me translate. Jadi pertanyaannya, Mas siapa tadi ya? Mas apa ya? Lupa lagi.
Fikri.
Mas Fikri. Jadi menurut Prof. Banu itu penting sekali ini bagi adik-adik ya yang mahasiswa. Ini kalau melihat sebuah kasus, ya kasus hukum tentunya ya, entah apapun kasusnya, itu jangan cepat-cepat apa namanya memberi tanggapan karena tanggapan Anda itu amat sangat berpengaruh bagi korban. Artinya yang Anda tanggapi ini. Jadi Anda harus bisa mengkaji apa namanya masalah ini dengan baik. Jadi jangan buru-buru julid nih ya. Biasanya kan netizen langsung julid aja kalau orangnya jelek, maksudnya bukan ideal victims, like mereka yang tidak terlihat, masyarakat yang tidak terlihat, misalnya masyarakat kelas bawah, kan sebenarnya kalian lebih lebih suka menjuliti nih kadang-kadang nih. Nah, tapi kalau kalau misalnya di framing medianya bagus banget itu kalian ikut-ikutan media gitu loh, tapi kalian nggak tahu masalah yang sebenarnya. Nah, jangan cepat-cepat julid di social media atau dimanapun ya, baik offline maupun online, ketika Anda tidak mengerti betul kasusnya, supaya yang ideal, yang not ideal victims ini protected also. Jadi kita kita posisikan berada untuk mereka ya, kita di posisi yang not ideal victims. Seandainya mereka tentunya sedih sekali kalau kasus ini terjadi pada kita karena we are invisible. Begitu ya, Pak Profesor Banu. So what is your suggestions for the policy, the regulation? I mean, law policy or the regulations politically in your country, for example, for this kind of cases?
yeah. So by strengthening victims' rights, okay.
Mhm.
So moving away, like I said, moving away from this ideal victim narratives as much as possible, recognizing victims' suffering. Like for example, if you look at victim support centers that are functional in our country, you don't have to report to the police to be able to get victim support, right?
Wow.
So which is a very, very positive movement. Yeah.
Yeah.
So victim is kept at the center, and you recognize that this person has endured harm and suffering. There is harm done against this individual, and that should qualify for victim support, right? So there is a person in pain, and somebody needs to help that individual. right? Without having to think about what caused it, who caused it, why does this happen, right? What is the role that this individual has played in it or not? Like, for example, if you go to a hospital with an injury, right? The duty of the doctor is to treat that wound
Yes.
first, right?
Yes.
So they are
Okay.
treating the physical injury, the cause, what caused it, who stabbed you. All those questions can come later. But the immediate help that is required to this individual needs to be delivered to save the life of this individual. So you need the similar kind of treatment when you are addressing victims, right? Rest everything could be secondary. The primary thing is that you need to see that this victimization, there is victimization, victim has suffered harm, there are damages which needs to be restored. So you have people who needs to help them. So it has to be that simple and delivered in that manner, because that is the right kind of justice that we should think about. Serve victims, right? Catching offender, serving them prison term, all of that should not be the direct consequential justice mechanisms, like from what I see how justice should be delivered, right? So if you want to undo damages done to the victim, you must recognize their harm, and your policies also need to be built around that. Victim rights need to be built around that, right? Right to protection, right to privacy, right to support, right to rehabilitation, right? All of that keeping victim at the center. So your understanding needs to be victim-centric, trauma-informed. You need to have lawyers who understand what trauma is, judges who understand what trauma is, right? So you have to bring in that attitudinal shift in terms of understanding the trauma of the victims, and you aligning yourself closely as sensitive individuals in your professions, right? So we cannot lose out on our sensitivities or humanity aspect when we are caring for victims. Yep.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So a lot of
for the
trauma-informed
answers.
practice, trauma-informed policy.
So policy, so trauma policies, trauma practices are regulated by the government. Okay, thank you. And how many victim centers in India in general?
Under these one-stop crisis centers, we have 800 plus centers in our country. 800 plus.
800. Okay, that's. Do you think that it's ideal, or maybe the number is not ideal yet, but at least we do something for those who are invisible.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there are several challenges also with these centers, which is a different thing altogether. But we have something.
Okay, I can understand that. Okay, thank you so much for the answers, Professor Banu. It's very insightful. Ya, jadi kalau di India ada victim centers ya. Saya nggak tahu kalau di Indonesia karena saya bukan dari hukum, jadi mungkin saya harus browsing dulu. Ada nggak victim centers di Indonesia? Baik, ada lagi nggak yang mau tanya? Kalau di India ada victim center tadi kurang lebih 800-an ya, meskipun tidak ideal jumlahnya, tapi itu sudah membantu mereka yang dianggap victims ya, apa namanya, korban, siapapun dia ya tetap harus diprotect, mendapatkan hak-hak yang sama. Ada lagi mau bertanya sebelum kita akhiri? Tidak ada dari Bapak Ibu dosen mungkin? Kalau tidak ada, saya akhiri. Profesor Banu. Ya. Profesor Banu, thank you for, tidak ada nggih dari para dosen nggih? Kelihatannya nggak ada nggih, sudah menurun jumlahnya 189. Professor Banu, I think we have end for the discussions. Thank you so much for today. We love you very much. It is again very excellent presentations. I hope, or the Dean hope, Dr. Kusri Rizkianto hopes we can meet you in India for the conference. And I would like to give to deliver to the master ceremony again. Thank you so much for the discussion today. I'm not from the law faculty, but I learned a lot from you today. And thank you so much.
You've done a good job. You've done a good job. Thank you, Professor Yoga, for moderating the session. Thanks a lot.
Ya, Pak Dekan mau menyampaikan sesuatu sebelum saya kembalikan ke
Cukup.
Okay, thank you. Mbak Merlin, back to you.
Okay, well, I would like to say thank you very much for our speaker, the one and only, the amazing speaker, the Honorable Dr. Banu Prakasnuna from India, for the fruitful talk and discussion. It was insightful lecture, and also I would like to say thanks to Mrs. Dr. Yoga Prihatin MPD as the moderator for today's agenda. Well, ladies and gentlemen, finally we have come to the end of this event. To all participants, I would like to say thank you very much for coming virtually and joining our International Public Lecture 2026. Thank you for your kind attentions. I do hope all participants take many insights, knowledge, and benefits from today's event. And now let's close this event by reciting Hamdalah. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin.
Alhamdulillahirrahmanirrahim.
Marilyn Silviani, as the Mistress of Ceremony, on behalf of the organizing committee, would like to express my most sincere gratitude for your kind, enthusiastic participations today. Thank you very much. And also my apologies for any inconvenience. So everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you around. Bye-bye. Thank
Okay, thank you so
Thank you so
much,
much.
Dr. Banu.
Terima
Have a
kasih.
great day. Thank you,
Yeah,
Mrs.
thank
you,
you.
Prof.
Bye-bye.
Yoga.
Betul. Bye-bye.
Bye
Take care.
bye.